Wow, you guys have sent in a ton of sources about race and ethnicity this time.
It's a really interesting mix, too.
Yeah, we've got like everything from reports on higher education to analyses of hate crimes.
And even a deep dive into economic equity.
Seems like everyone's trying to figure out how all these pieces fit together, you know?
Absolutely. And I think the sources you chose give us a great lens for exploring these really complicated issues.
Okay, so let's dive in. We have the 2024 status report on race and ethnicity in higher ed from the American Council on Education.
The ACE report.
Right, the ACE report for short.
Hmm.
And we've also got some interesting findings from the Pew Research Center.
About how discrimination shapes the views of Black Americans.
Okay, and we can't forget about the Leadership Conference Education Funds report.
On hate crime trends, which are honestly pretty sobering.
Plus, we've got the U.S. Treasury's Racial Equity Progress Report.
And a special report from Edelman focusing on business and racial justice.
That's a lot to cover, but let's start with something that feels super relevant to, like, everyone's life, higher education.
Yeah. Especially if you're thinking about college or have kids who are.
Yes, exactly. This ACE report paints an interesting picture. You know, on the one hand, we see more Hispanic and Black students enrolling in undergrad programs.
Which is great.
It is. But there's a catch, right?
Right. Well, what's interesting is that while enrollment is going up, completion rates for those students are still behind their white and Asian peers.
Hmm. So they're starting college, but not necessarily finishing.
Yeah, and in fact, Black students consistently have the lowest completion rates across all racial and ethnic groups.
That's a pretty big disparity. What do you think's going on there?
I think it makes you wonder about all the factors beyond just getting into college that are affecting these students.
Yeah, it's not just about opening the door, it's about what happens once you're inside.
Exactly.
And the report also mentioned the financial burden that many of these students face. It says that Black undergraduate students borrow at the highest rates.
Yeah, that makes me think about the long-term impact of all that student loan debt.
Me too, especially for students who may already be facing other economic challenges.
That's a really crucial point. We can't just look at getting into college. We have to consider those financial hurdles and how those hurdles might impact students' futures.
Especially for students from underrepresented backgrounds.
Exactly.
And then this ACE report goes on to talk about the lack of diversity among faculty and staff.
It says that white individuals dominate both full-time faculty positions and new hires.
Which means that a lot of students aren't seeing themselves reflected in their professors or mentors.
And that can have a big impact. Think
Yeah.
about it, if you're a student from a minority group and you don't see yourself represented in leadership positions.
It might make you question whether you belong.
Exactly. And it can also limit the richness of the education experience for all students when you don't have those diverse perspectives in the classroom.
Okay, so we've got these challenges in higher education, but then we also have these broader societal issues that we need to talk about.
Like the personal experiences of racism that come up in the Pew and Edelman reports.
Yeah, and honestly, some of the findings there are pretty disheartening.
It's tough. What really struck me was this feeling of stagnation or even regression when it comes to addressing racial justice.
Like we're moving backwards.
It's a feeling that a lot of people are experiencing. You know, Edelman actually found that 1 in 2 Americans believe that the media falls short when it comes to reporting on the root causes of racism.
And then a growing majority feel like little to no progress is being made.
Yeah, that's a pretty bleak outlook.
It is. And it makes you wonder, is this just a perception problem or are we really not making progress?
It points to this disconnect between what people are seeing and feeling and the actions that are being taken.
Okay, so we've got this lack of progress. And then on top of that, we have this report from the Leadership Conference Education Fund about hate crime trends.
And that's where things get really concerning.
Yeah, because it's not just about attitudes anymore, it's about actions.
This report shows us that hate crimes aren't just these isolated incidents. They're often a reflection of what's going on in society.
Like a symptom of something bigger.
Exactly. And the data is alarming. Hate crimes have almost doubled since 2015.
Doubled. That's crazy.
And what's even scarier is that these numbers probably don't even tell the whole story.
Because a lot of hate crimes go unreported.
Exactly. So we're likely looking at a much bigger problem than the data even shows.
Okay, so we've got these rising hate crimes and this sense that we're not making much progress on racial justice. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's important to face these issues head on so that we can start working towards solutions.
Okay, but where do we even begin? With all these interconnected issues, it's hard to know where to focus our efforts.
Well, I think the U.S. Treasury's Racial Equity Progress Report offers some interesting insights.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Well, it highlights some of the government's efforts to address these really big economic disparities.
Okay, so like what are they actually doing?
Well, for one thing, the American Rescue Plan Act played a big part in making sure the economic recovery after the pandemic was equitable.
Right, so everyone had a chance to bounce back.
Exactly. And the report also talks about these investments in community development financial institutions.
CDFIs.
Yeah, CDFIs. They're these specialized financial institutions that are focused on giving loans and financial services to communities that haven't always had easy access to those things.
Okay, so they're trying to level the playing field a bit.
Right. And they're also investing in minority depository institutions, or MDIs.
And those do.
They're banks and credit unions that are owned and operated by minorities. So they're really focused on serving those communities.
So it sounds like these investments are all about like giving communities the resources they need to build wealth.
Exactly. And there's also this program called the State Small Business Credit Initiative.
SSBCI.
Yeah, the SSBCI. It's designed to help small businesses, especially those in marginalized communities.
So they're really targeting those who have been left out in the past.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about all these initiatives is that they're using data and working with the communities to make sure the help is going where it's needed most.
It's like they're being really strategic about it.
Exactly. And the report also mentions this big focus on tax fairness.
Oh yeah, making sure the system works for everyone.
Right, because a fair tax system can really help individuals and families build financial stability.
Okay, so the government's taking some steps, but what about businesses? What are they doing to address racial justice?
Well, Edelman's report goes into that. It talks about how DEI initiatives are becoming more and more important in the workplace.
DEI?
Yeah, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right.
It's basically about creating a workplace where everyone feels welcome and respected.
And where everyone has equal opportunities.
Exactly. And the report found that this isn't just good for employees, it's good for business, too.
How so?
Well, when employees feel valued, they're more likely to be loyal to the company. And diverse workforces are better able to connect with a wider range of customers.
So it was a win-win.
Right. But the report also mentions some of the challenges that businesses are facing with DEI.
Like what?
Well, there's this concern that some people see DEI as a political agenda. And there's also a need for these initiatives to be genuine, not just something that companies do to look good.
Right, they need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Exactly. And they need to be able to measure the impact of their efforts.
So it's not enough to just have a DEI program. They need to make sure it's actually making a difference.
Right. And they need to be transparent about their progress.
So employees and customers can see that they're serious about it.
Exactly. And one really interesting finding from the report was that employee loyalty actually increases when organizations have strong DEI initiatives in place.
That makes sense. People want to work for companies that share their values.
Yeah, and they want to feel like they belong.
So it seems like there's this theme running through everything we've talked about, whether it's education, the government, or businesses.
What's that?
This idea that creating a truly inclusive environment takes a lot of effort and a real commitment to addressing these systemic barriers.
You're absolutely right. It's not something that's going to happen overnight.
And it requires a willingness to have some tough conversations and to really listen to each other.
Yeah, and to learn from each other's experiences.
And to recognize our shared humanity.
Exactly. And the Treasury Report brings up this really important point about how financial assets are key to achieving family financial security.
It's like it's not just about income, it's about having that safety net.
Right. And that's something that a lot of people of color have been denied because of those systemic barriers we've been talking about.
So organizations like Kinetic Mind are doing really important work by helping people build that foundation.
Yeah, they're empowering people with the knowledge and tools they need to make smart financial decisions.
So it sounds like we've got a long way to go, but there are some positive things happening.
Yeah, there are people and organizations working hard to create a more just and equitable world.
And we all have a role to play in that. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here about race and ethnicity in America, education, personal experiences with discrimination, hate crimes, the government's role, businesses. What can we even take away from all this?
Well, I think the main thing is that all these issues are just so interconnected.
It's like a tangled web.
Yeah, exactly. You can't really address one without thinking about all the others.
Like we saw how those financial gaps in education can have a huge impact on someone's whole life.
It affects their job, their ability to build wealth, even their health.
And then you have to think about the historical context too,
Well,
right?
absolutely. And we can't ignore how all the injustices of the past are still shaping our present.
That's why this idea of financial literacy and economic empowerment feels so important.
It's about giving people the tools to break free from those cycles of poverty and inequality that have been going on for way too long.
And creating a system where everyone actually has a chance to succeed.
That's the goal.
Earlier we mentioned Comedic Mind, that organization that offers resources on wealth building.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
I think they'd be a great starting point for anyone wanting to learn more about this stuff.
Definitely. They have so much information on everything from budgeting and investing to understanding credit and building generational wealth.
And they're really focused on helping those communities that have been shut out of the traditional financial system.
It's such a valuable resource.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the big things you hope people take away from all this?
Well, first off, I'd say awareness is huge. We have to educate ourselves about these complex issues.
And be willing to really dig into the systemic stuff that's driving those racial disparities.
Right. And once we have that awareness, we need to actually talk to each other.
Have those hard conversations, but do it with respect.
Exactly. Listen to different perspectives. Try to understand where other people are coming from.
And then we have to take action.
Whether that's supporting organizations, fighting for racial justice, pushing for policy changes, or even just talking to our own friends and family about this stuff.
It all adds up.
Every little bit helps.
It's a collective effort. We all have a responsibility to create a more just and equitable society.
And that takes constant learning and growth and a commitment to building a world where everyone has the opportunity to truly thrive.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We hope you learned a lot, and we encourage you to keep exploring these crucial topics.
Knowledge is power, and by understanding these complex issues, we can start to build a better world for everyone.